Without further ado, the overarching allegation I'm making is that the public has been fully deceived about the player Leffen's true nature because they never had access to Evidence.zip. All media publications that have ever been made about Evidence.zip, such as TSM's 2015 documentary series and Red Bull's 2016 documentary series, can be considered propaganda intended to cover up the truth about why Leffen was banned from his country in 2013. Leffen directly collaborated with these companies in order to issue this propaganda, which has led people to believe that Evidence.zip was only ever a bunch of forum posts. Additionally, Leffen has lied to the community about Evidence.zip at every single juncture by describing it as a conspiracy and a hit piece. What this tells you is that one of the biggest myths within the Smash community is that Leffen has changed since Evidence.zip. This video will easily debunk this myth, which is quite frankly one of the most dangerous myths out there. Leffen's tendency to perpetrate this myth has been intended to conceal the fact that he still behaves identically to what was documented about him 8 years ago, and that the only thing he's learned since then is how to cover his tracks better. This video will also challenge the notion that reintegrating Leffen back into the Smash scene was ever the right move, as I have a huge amount of evidence to suggest otherwise. The truth is that Evidence.zip was a collection of 9 testimonies in which 6 Swedes and 3 Americans warned people about the destructive nature of Leffen's behavior. Back then, Leffen didn't do a very good job of hiding his behavior, which is why he got banned. 4 of these people were victims of Leffen, while 5 were onlookers. Because I've been the only victim to continue playing Melee this entire time, I've been able to see things nobody else did. This is largely why I've managed to find myself outcast and labeled a conspiracy theorist by the current generation, when in reality, I'm the only one who knows the truth. The Evidence.zip testimonies that were never released to the public contain some of the worst behavior ever documented in gaming history. I'll read you some quotes that stand out from them. For years, Leffen has imposed on the happiness of countless members of our community. His unparalleled hatred and vulgarity leave people feeling belittled and attacked wherever he goes. His self-righteousness, manipulation, lies, superiority complex, nonsensical reasons for attacking people, and refusal to change make him a threat to not only the Smash community but society. He's both a psychopath and a narcissist to a dangerous degree. The way Leffen has mistreated me for my disability is the worst any human being has treated me in my life. You cannot even make a case for him having joked with me, as there's such a huge difference between what jokes me and my friends have come up with and what Leffen said in regards to both tone and degree. He's not only belittled me, but he's also spoken for me a bunch of times when I've been spoken to by others, interrupting my response and telling the other party that he obviously doesn't hear or understand you, dude, and even outright shutting me out of conversations. He's even called me socially disabled once. I have on different occasions asked Leffen, both online and in person, directly and via mutual friends, to stop treating me like this since I was feeling horrible about it. All of these attempts to make him cease his acting have been fruitless, and I've been foolish enough to keep trying through all the years I've known Leffen. If people actually took the time to wrap their heads around what actions Leffen has exhibited toward me and many more, the thought of doing anything less than not welcoming him to any future tournaments or gatherings is ludicrous. The mere thought of it is preposterous, and the act of allowing the things he'll subject others to is nothing less than grotesque and an act of cruelty toward his targets. I don't know exactly how to explain how cruel this person is, but he honestly feels better about himself when he makes other people suffer because of the actions he is doing. A person like that doesn't deserve to attend any tournaments at all. I'm one of the TOs in Sweden, and I will make sure to protect the community I love. I really hope everyone else can take the responsibility too. In conclusion, Leffen is in his own tier of maliciousness and potential damage to the community. I'd like to see him improve his behavior, but at this point in time, his attendance at tournaments detracts from the experience of others, driving away players in an already struggling environment. It would be in the best interest of the entire community if he is sentenced to at least a temporary worldwide ban from tournaments, and preferably a Smashboards ban as well. Any sort of interaction with Leffen gives him the chance to abuse and insult others, and without making it very apparent that his behavior is unacceptable by preventing him from competing, he won't change. The key takeaway from these quotes is that Leffen is a pathological liar with unbelievably malicious intentions, and the fact that he's gone to such lengths to hide this from the community proves that it's still true. The reason this is a problem is because if you'd known what to look for, then you would have seen through the fact that Leffen not only hasn't changed, but that he's enacted massive political cons that have hurt innocent people's lives as well as the Smash community at large in recent years. Leffen kept his intentions well disguised throughout each of these cons, which is the main change he's made since being banned in 2013. This, in conjunction with the fact that Leffen currently has 300,000 followers and a reputation as a trustworthy individual, leads me to my main allegation, which is that Leffen is a mass manipulator who has corrupted the scene's politics in horrific ways. Additionally, Leffen has made it very difficult to hold him accountable for anything, as he's created a culture of fear and censorship in which people are afraid or unable to confront him, as well as given himself a villain persona that he uses to justify his malicious actions. What this means is that Leffen has in fact emerged as the threat to society that the Swedes predicted, as he's not only damaged the community in more ways than one could ever imagine, but also seems to have an endless trajectory of destruction that involves entering other gaming communities. Thus, my goal is to convey the fact that the Smash scene is currently in a state of emergency. Something I want to emphasize is that anything Leffen says in response to this video should be interpreted as an attempt to evade my allegations, as he's done this several times before. I will also be using this video as an appeal to the fact that I've been globally banned from Smash tournaments for creating Evidence.zip too. With all due respect, I believe the vast majority of my ban statement to be inaccurate. For example, I did not perform a defamation campaign, as all of the claims I made against Leffen were truthful and backed by evidence. I also did not act maliciously. My intention was, in fact, to seek justice against someone who I believe to be eroding the Smash community. I'm also not a threat to Leffen's physical safety, or anyone's safety for that matter. I want to apologize once again for Evidence.zip 2's poor presentation, as it was largely responsible for these confusions. In order to prove my claims against Leffen, I will mostly be focusing on 4 political cons. These are the Hax Con, the Hungrybox Con, the MeToo Con, and the Metagame Con. All 4 of these cons can be classified as acts of mass manipulation that the community can't afford to ignore, as these acts will endlessly continue if Leffen isn't held accountable. Before I can even get to any of these cons, there are 2 more situations that I need to address. These are the way Leffen responded to Evidence.zip 2, and the way Leffen responded to the Sky House conspiracy that was recently brought to light by Technicals. These 2 situations can be considered cons on their own, and so I'll be going over each of them. I'll also be explaining how everything Leffen does within each of these 6 cons can be traced back to Evidence.zip, just to show you how easily things could have been predicted. I'll start by going over how Leffen responded to Evidence.zip 2. Even though Evidence.zip 2 was poorly presented, it still contained many allegations against Leffen that he never directly addressed. Leffen only ever made 2 tweets in response to these allegations. The first tweet was made 30 minutes after Evidence.zip 2 was posted. It read, "At this point I don't even know what to do. Legit concerned with my safety at events with this level of things. We'll be looking into a lawyer before saying more just to make sure my bases are covered." The first half of this tweet should be interpreted as gaslighting and self-victimization. In Evidence.zip, there's an excerpt that reads, "Following his ban from Sweden, rather than apologizing to those he's hurt, Leffen decided to stay true to his roots. He's chosen to play the victim card and ridicule the Swedish scene for banning him, claiming that they are fake people who are doomed without him. We hope that after reading the attached testimonies and forum posts, there is zero doubt that Leffen is not the victim, and that his decision to continue to lie only serves as further evidence of his character." This excerpt proves that Leffen is, beyond any reasonable doubt, not the victim in this situation. Furthermore, I'll read you an excerpt from my Evidence.zip testimony to prove that I've been the victim of Leffen's abuse for 10 years now. The excerpt reads, "I've been a member of this beautiful community since 2005. Never have I seen someone cause such a net loss of happiness within us. Never have I seen someone so poisonous. I beg of those reading this to take Evo and Genesis 3 away from Leffen for the sake of our community. He doesn't deserve to be a part of what will be the grandest week in the history of Melee. Those who he has abused do not deserve to have to see him there. His path of destruction has to end." Unfortunately, by framing himself as the victim and making it seem as though he didn't know what to do anymore, Leffen was able to convince thousands of people that I was the threat to him. This caused organizations like Summit to ban me from their event, and it was also written into the global ban statement that I showed you earlier. Leffen was able to flip the entire situation on me and distract people from my allegations. The second half of Leffen's tweet from June 5th was just as manipulative. This part of the tweet suggested that Leffen would be seeking a lawyer. News outlets quickly picked up on the fact that Leffen was supposedly doing this, when it was never actually the case. If you search through Leffen's Twitter history, you'll see that he deleted 6 years of tweets after I uploaded Evidence.zip 2. Everything from February 7th, 2019 and back is gone, and Leffen deleted some key YouTube videos as well. Fortunately, I still have most of the tweets and videos that I need stored on my hard drive, and so I'll be able to include them in this video. I should also mention that Leffen specifically chose to delete tweets from February 7th, 2019 and back because that is the exact date of the final tweet he made within the Hungrybox Con, which shows that Leffen subconsciously knows what he's guilty of. Something else I should mention is that Leffen's tendency to delete evidence was also documented in Evidence.zip. There's an excerpt from a player named VJ's testimony that reads, "Leffen has on several occasions edited or removed his posts in order to embellish himself, which clearly shows that he's a dishonest person." This means that Leffen only claimed that he was calling a lawyer in order to manipulate people into thinking he'd actually done so. On March 30th of this year, one of the original Evidence.zip victims named C explained that Leffen used a lawyer bluff in order to make it seem as though he was in the right in these types of situations. C added that this is one of Leffen's many strategies that make him a psychopath beyond any reasonable doubt. The next tweet Leffen made in response to Evidence.zip 2 happened on June 12th. This tweet read, "Hax's obsession with me is something I've had to deal with for 10 years now, so unfortunately none of this is a surprise to me." This tweet is debunked by Mike Hager's Evidence.zip testimony, which contains tons and tons of examples of abuse, such as, Leffen has tried to make me seem like an insane stereotype of someone locked up in a mental hospital who's so crazy they require a lobotomy. He also adds made-up fantasies about me like how I'm known for lying and stealing. He has spread this on various forums with people I've met and will meet in real life, and therefore given them false preconceived ideas about me. He's also sent it around in PMs and made a pastebin about it. He also implied that I take LSD, which I never have. Mike Hager continued, when I was in my first to second year of high school, I was clearly at the bottom of the totem pole. I wouldn't say I was bullied, but people were very mean to me for no reason. I was once pushed into a wall for absolutely no reason at the end of a basketball game, and nobody cared. Nothing that those people did to me can compare to how Leffen has hurt me, even if you count everything all 20 or so people did together. Whenever Mike Hager would confront Leffen about his behavior, Leffen would respond by calling Mike Hager obsessed. For example, Leffen made 5 separate forum posts that read, "Keep giving yourself excuses to obsess over me for. The fact is that it's only going to hurt yourself and the people who you drag into your insane obsession. I'm going to try, I really am, to make this my last post about you, Mike Hager. Talking to and knowing you has been nothing but poisonous to me. You're probably going to go balls to the wall crazy continuing your obsession over me, but I really hope that you'll eventually realize how stupid and fruitless it is. Also, fuck off then, Mike Hager. Just leave my friends alone. I don't give a fuck if you talk shit to me, but leave others out of your obsession. It's apparent that you don't understand this, though, and I'm happy that you don't. It always makes me smile when you continue obsessing over me." Mike Hager, the parent, I'm sorry you're just so fucking hopeless. Keep doing whatever you'd like. Continuing to obsess over me is just gonna hurt yourself and no one else. These forum posts caused Mike Hager to conclude his testimony by writing, "Leffen is a chronic liar and narcissist to a sick degree. This person is ripping apart my social life, other people's social lives, and the entire Smash scene, even internationally, as you'll see in other testimonies. He's ambitious in destroying people's lives, demoralizing new and old players alike, to the degree of making people quit. This is not only justice, it is a necessity. Please help us." The fact that people like Mike Hager used to write these things about Leffen, who can now further isolate his targets by gaslighting them and calling them obsessed, is insanely cruel, and part of what makes him so dangerous. Going back to Leffen's tweet from June 12th, he also wrote, "I do not believe there's been any credible claims made, so I will not be responding further. This is obviously untrue, since Leffen deleted 6 years of evidence in response to my claims, which I'll be restating in this video." Next, Leffen wrote, "I know I haven't been perfect, especially 10 years ago when I was a young teenager, but I'm trying to learn from my mistakes, and many people can attest to that. This will be the last I speak about this because I do not want to entertain this further, and I hope everyone can respect my wish to be left alone." This type of statement can be described as a blanket statement or generalization. Essentially, you make a blanket statement in order to avoid having to address any of the nuances of what's being alleged. Leffen's blanket statement makes no sense because not only has he hidden what he did 10 years ago, but also because my allegations against him were all from the past couple of years. Leffen tends to make blanket statements like these very often. Another example was when the Metagame documentary aired last December. Metagame originally showed footage of Evidence.zip victims, which Leffen responded to by saying, "Maybe someday I'll tell my version, but honestly, I just wish we could all leave this in the past. I think we all did shit, myself obviously included, but we've moved on and we're better for it." Leffen obviously never went on to tell his version, as the only reason he made this tweet was to take the target off of his back. In case what I've shown you so far isn't enough, I'll conclude this section of the video by showing you another Evidence.zip excerpt that explained Leffen's post-ban behavior. One of the testimonies read, "Following the announcement of his Swedish ban, Leffen has done the most disrespectful and despicable thing by doing everything in his might to manipulate people into being against the ban or lifting it. He has displayed disrespect for the ban and the people arranging it by doing the following. Claiming that nobody had spoken to him about the ban in advance, despite having been warned on several occasions. Trying to contact several smashers, both his victims and those who stand behind his ban, saying that things are either misunderstandings or falsified information. These acts are clear displays of him trying to go to extreme lengths in order to manipulate people. And denying many of the points made, showing blatant unbelievable disrespect for the people he has hurt." At this point, I need to make a couple of things clear since my career is on the line. For one, I believe my ban statement should be rescinded. I maintain that my ban statement, as well as the community's current perception of me, have been the result of extreme manipulation and misunderstandings. And secondly, what I've shown you thus far, as well as what I'll show you throughout the remainder of this video, will prove that Leffen is a mass manipulator beyond any reasonable doubt. I haven't even gotten into my case yet, and I've already given people huge reasons to be concerned about Leffen. For example, Leffen's Twitch bio claims that he's honest to a fault, which we now know to be untrue. This type of bio is known as a preemptive defense, which is when someone assures you of their trustworthiness without any provocation. A preemptive defense is usually intended to manipulate people, and Leffen's Twitch bio is no exception. I also find it concerning that Leffen's Twitter bio has the Save Smash hashtag in it, which creates the false guise of good intentions. Need I remind people that this community largely consists of a younger audience that would easily be fooled by these types of bios, and that we're knowingly letting someone with 300,000 followers use them. Next, I'll show you how Leffen evaded accountability for a separate subject very recently. In Evidence.zip 2, one of the claims I made was that Leffen targeted Zero maliciously during last summer's MeToo movement. Even though I didn't have hard evidence to prove this, there was never a chance it wasn't true, just based on Leffen's malicious nature, as well as the fact that Leffen became involved with MeToo for strategic reasons in the first place, as I'll eventually prove in this video. Still, my ban statement claims that my assertion that Leffen conspired to cancel Zero was particularly concerning. I'd like to clarify that Leffen did in fact conspire with Jisoo to cancel Zero, and that this should be viewed separately from the second round of allegations that came out against Zero later. At no point did I ever discredit the second round of allegations, and so I maintain that this aspect of my ban statement is inaccurate as well. On June 25th, Technicals released a video which solidified that Jisoo's involvement with last year's MeToo movement was fraudulent. This was exactly as I suspected. Jisoo happens to be my ex-girlfriend, who I know to be extremely manipulative, and so I assumed this was the case as soon as I saw her align with Leffen. Technicals pointed out that Jisoo made tactical errors last summer that made her intentions way too obvious, such as putting Batman in her bio directly after making allegations without providing any evidence. In Evidence.zip 2, I argued that Leffen made far too many tactical errors as well. For example, just the fact that Leffen followed up on Jisoo's baseless allegations with a twitlonger was suspicious in itself, but the contents of Leffen's twitlonger were also ridiculous. Most notably, Leffen's twitlonger contained a testimony in which he allegedly witnessed Zero sharing hentai with Japanese smashers at Apex 2013, which Leffen claimed made Jisoo's allegations more credible. However, Leffen's testimony contained an oversight in that Zero was 17 at the time, whereas the Japanese players were older than him. Therefore, the Japanese players would have been guilty of sexual harassment against a minor according to Leffen's own testimony. Yet Leffen phrased it as though Zero was the guilty party. This loophole, which made it obvious that Leffen was only ever intent on canceling Zero, can be seen in this post in which Zero apologized to Leffen for sharing photos with adults back when he was 17. It was a pipe dream to ever believe that Leffen had gone after Zero with good intentions, and Technical's video proved that. It turned out that the moment several of the Japanese players read Leffen's testimony, they offered to testify on Zero's behalf in order to clarify that they weren't even looking at hentai. They were only ever looking at pictures of clothed anime characters. This is an example of one of Leffen's trademark strategies that you'll need to keep in mind throughout this video, which is misrepresentation. There are going to be points in this video in which Leffen tells key lies that will change the entire meaning of certain stories. Leffen has been known to do this ever since Evidence.zip, as shown in the quotes from earlier in which he claimed that Mike Hager was a thief and a user of the drug LSD. This is why Leffen claiming that people were looking at hentai when that never actually happened shouldn't surprise you. That brings me to the way Leffen responded to Technicals' video, which is very similar to the way he responded to Evidence.zip 1 and 2. This clip shows that within Leffen's Twitch stream, he's been banning and censoring anyone who brings up Jisoo's allegations. Leffen's Twitch bio claims that he only bans trolls and idiots, but clearly he bans people who busted him for conspiracies as well. Deceptive social media bios really shouldn't surprise you by this point. There should be no doubt remaining that Leffen and Jisoo conspired to cancel Zero during last summer's MeToo movement, but I want to show you how deep this conspiracy runs. 32 minutes before Jisoo made her allegations against Zero, Leffen made a tweet that I find incredibly suspicious. Leffen's tweet read, "Thanks for listening to me, but more importantly, keep listening to the people that are brave enough to come forward. Going to take a break from social media for a while. Take care." There are a lot of problems with this tweet. If you look at this tweet from the perspective of someone who has malicious intent, it's actually intended to do 3 things. 1. Convince people to listen to the next victim who will come forward, which is Jisoo in this case. 2. Claim that Leffen is taking a break in order to make it seem as though Leffen and Jisoo have nothing to do with each other. This means that if people had believed Jisoo's initial allegations, then Leffen most likely would have followed up by acting as though he didn't know that they were coming. However, Leffen's plan backfired once he saw that people didn't believe Jisoo's allegations, at which point he scrambled by writing a twitlonger that defended her. And finally, 3. Eliminate Zero as a threat to market share in order to ascend to the #1 position within the community. At the time, Zero had about 330,000 followers, while Leffen had 280. The positive vibes Leffen gave off during the MeToo movement allowed him to ascend to closer to 300,000, and Zero's elimination would allow Leffen to ascend to the #1 position. Until Leffen shows proof to the contrary, I would stick to assuming that this is exactly how he was thinking. Not only will the reasons to support this theory evolve as this video goes on, but there are also plenty of quotes that corroborate this theory within Evidence.zip. This quote, for example, describes how Leffen has always been known to scheme against those who he dislikes, and viciously go after them with lies and other tactics when he sees the opportunity. Something else that I need to show you is a sequence of events that happened a few months ago. When technicals first started raising doubts about Jisoo's intentions during the MeToo movement, Leffen quickly jumped in to defend her on Reddit. Leffen wrote, "I'm not even surprised by technicals saying those vile things. Obviously we don't want people like him in the community, but attention is all that parasitic clout chaser wants." Leffen would also begin referring to technicals as a cockroach on his Twitch stream.
For those that don't know the context, I made a stupid emotional tweet at Parasite of the Smash community technicals. And then I deleted it because I realized that that cockroach doesn't deserve any attention.
Now that Leffen and Jisoo's conspiracy has been exposed, Leffen has yet to respond to Technical's call-outs regarding the situation. Leffen is openly brushing the fact that he participated in a conspiracy under the rug and hoping that people forget about it, which isn't okay. This also means that Leffen made his Reddit post under the false guise of wanting to defend the community when he was in fact looking to exploit it. At this point, I want to be clear about what these two parties are guilty of. The community currently views Jisoo to be guilty of a conspiracy to cancel Sky Williams, and they don't seem to believe Leffen to be guilty of anything. However, this actually isn't true. The truth is that both of these people are guilty of a conspiracy to cancel a then innocent Zero. The reason the community overlooks this is because Zero was later deemed guilty of sexual misconduct against a separate victim. However, this doesn't retrospectively exonerate Leffen and Jisoo of the fact that they conspired to cancel Zero when he was still innocent. This reveals the gap between how the community thinks and how a court of law would think. As much as the community would love to believe that Leffen isn't guilty of anything here, he is in fact guilty of conspiring to pin an innocent man as a sexual predator. The next thing I want to bring up is that Leffen is guilty of indirectly enabling the conspiracy to cancel Sky Williams. I say this because Leffen is the only person devious enough to enable lesser conspirators such as Jisoo in the first place. If you'll recall, Jisoo didn't actually have the confidence to come forward with her allegations against Zero without Leffen's permission. These allegations later snowballed into the ones she made about Sky. Leffen himself referenced this sequence of events within his Twitlonger when he explained that Jisoo reached out to him by saying that she trusted his judgment. This shows that Leffen is shifting the social dynamics of the scene by enabling lower, less capable manipulators to be empowered by his presence. Unsurprisingly, these shifts in social dynamics were described in Evidence.zip. In C's testimony, he wrote, "Leffen has changed the social atmosphere around people and the scene as a whole for the worse. He's caused undeserved hatred towards innocent people and solely managed to instigate people spreading this hatred around like wildfire. This shows that by permitting Leffen into the Smash community, it will continue to descend into a world of manipulation and malice. Once you connect the dots, it becomes clear that Sky's life would never have been ruined if Leffen hadn't gotten the ball rolling." I'll conclude this section of the video by drawing the parallels between the Jisoo and Sky situation and the situation that is currently going on between me and Leffen. Just a few months ago, the community believed Sky and I to be the guilty parties in our respective situations. However, what the community has failed to realize is that just like Sky, I fell prey to extreme manipulation. Leffen is in fact the kingpin behind most of the manipulation that takes place within this community, and the rest of this video will prove that. From this point on, I'll be keeping track of a list of charges against Leffen, starting with the ones we've gone over so far. Next, I'll get into the Evidence.zip 2 cons, starting with the ones Leffen's aimed at me. Evidence.zip 2 made me realize that a lot of people weren't even aware that Leffen and I had beef, so I want to show you this quote. In Evidence.zip, C wrote, "We are in a community that is being manipulated by unbelievably sick people. The chasm between what Leffen and his sympathizers manipulates people into believing is going on and what is really going on is absolutely enormous. The vastness and level of psychological warfare Leffen exhibits toward his prospects is one of the most elaborate acts of vicious intent I've had the misfortune of witnessing firsthand. This ongoing torment his viciousness forces his prospects to endure, directly and indirectly, by leaving them as sole beneficiary to all the consequences his actions may cause, which is why they evidently always end up being the ones paying the price and taking its toll. What this quote tells you is that the abuse Leffen aims toward his victims is so hidden that no one other than the victim can truly see it. This is why people tend to gaslight me whenever I claim that Leffen has been highly predatory toward me and other people like Hungrybox, who I'll eventually talk about in this video. Furthermore, Leffen exacerbates this gaslighting by making it seem as though his victims are obsessed with him, when it's actually the other way around. My interactions with Leffen first began in 2011 on Smashboards. Leffen had begun to make his name known on the boards around that time, and it all started with him stalking my every move. This would persist for 2 years, which led to me testifying for Evidence.zip in 2013. In my Evidence.zip testimony, I described Leffen as a dark cloud that constantly looked to damage my reputation and keep track of everything I did, including how I was doing at local tournaments and who I was actively practicing with. I also explained how every attempt I made to reconcile with Leffen was fruitless and that he seemed very determined to remove me from the community. My own words were, "I cannot put into words the degree to which Leffen cannot be silenced once he has a vendetta on you." Evidence.zip was when I found out that everything I just described had also been experienced by other people. This led to us trying to get Leffen banned from EVO 2013, which I personally took the initiative in doing. Unfortunately, Mr. Wizard would deny our case on the basis of no assault, which is exactly what I feared would happen. Surely enough, Leffen's stalker tendencies would continue on the very first night of EVO 2013. That night I left my room for a couple of hours to enjoy Vegas. At one point I needed to return to my room to grab my phone charger, and so I called my friend Cody to let him know that I'd be heading back. Cody then told me that Leffen had room hopped to our room of all places. This led to an awkward interaction in which I didn't want to enter my own room when I got back to the hotel. Instead, I had Cody hand me my charger at the door. These logs show that I discussed the situation with Cody last year. Later that weekend, Leffen would continue to torment me by making efforts to befriend J-Man, a childhood friend of mine who I was rooming with. There were several interactions during the EVO 2013 weekend in which I didn't want to approach J-Man because he was with Leffen, which, knowing Leffen, was strategic. Leffen's tendency to invade social circles was documented by Mike Hager when he wrote, "As Leffen kept on abusing me, I made the decision to physically avoid him at events. Leffen took note of this and decided to use it against me. I saw that he started trying to befriend some of the best friends I have in the Smash community to take them away from me. These people didn't know much of what he'd done to people, and were among the lucky few who've been spared from his wrath." What all of this tells you is that Leffen never actually changed, but that he managed to give the whole world reason to believe he had changed. The main way he did this was with a statement he made on March 21st, 2013, which was designed to appeal to North Americans. All of the Evidence.zip victims knew that Leffen's statement was insincere, but the public didn't, and so Leffen became a wolf in sheep's clothing from that point on. What happens next will show you why all of the Evidence.zip victims viewed Leffen's behavior as a vendetta. I would end up finding out just how horrible these vendettas can be, since I'm the only victim who continued to play Melee since those days. On January 19th, 2017, 4 years after Evidence.zip was compiled, I announced to the Melee community that I'd be returning on a controller called the Box after spending several years on hiatus. Leffen then made the following comments the exact same day on his stream.
There's absolutely nothing. There's no proof or even anecdotal evidence the Smashbox is better for your hands. The number one issue is people not taking care of their hands. His was like, it feels like it's genetic. He has like arthritis and stuff like that. And Hax was honest to his own. Like, yes, I do worry that other people get hand issues, but I also think that it's 95% at least their own fault, and then like 5% the GameCube controller or whatever.
All of these statements were lies, and the fact that Leffen went as far as to discredit the fact that ergonomic controllers are necessary told me everything I needed to know, which was that he was gonna try to ban the Box and end my career. Leffen would also go on to make comments about me during this time period that proved he had malicious intent beyond any reasonable doubt.
It's not about some crazy person that made an Evidence.zip file.
The statement you just heard reveals Leffen's true motivations and nature by showing that he views Evidence.zip as a conspiracy and that he wants to exact revenge on the people who testified for it. Leffen would continue down this path at Summit 4, which took place in March 2017, by interrogating me about my plans to legalize the Box. Shortly after Summit 4, Leffen began misrepresenting literally everything I had said to him on social media in an attempt to get the Box banned. He also reached out to TOs such as Jabali and Mr. Wizard in order to convince them to ban the Box based on his lies. When people would ask Leffen what I thought about what he was saying, Leffen would assure them that I agreed with him, which wasn't true. Once I saw this, I quickly intervened and told Leffen that he was acting maliciously by putting words in my mouth. Leffen responded by saying that he wasn't acting maliciously, which he immediately contradicted by saying that he made contact with the engineer I was working with at the time. Up until that point, I'd only ever disclosed the name of my engineer once in my video from January 19th, which meant that Leffen had scanned that video from top to bottom. Leffen's relationship with my engineer will come into play later, so keep it in mind. Another few weeks later, Leffen would begin the process of flooding YouTube with anti-Box propaganda. This propaganda was designed to control public opinion by spreading massive falsehoods about game mechanics and controller mods that would affect the Box's legality. Leffen even went as far as to take a sudden interest in hand health as to discredit the idea that the Box was needed as an ergonomic controller. He would demonstrate that hand problems could simply be avoided by stretching, which, as we all know, is a lie, especially considering the fact that he now suffers from arthritis just like I do. I'm not going to go through all the game mechanics Leffen lied about during this time period, but I'll explain one of them in order to give you an idea of how malicious he is. In Melee, there's a mechanic called 1.0 Cardinal that gives a 1% advantage when it comes to things like dash speed and DI. 2 of Leffen's videos were aimed at this mechanic. They were titled Box Controller Exposed and Digital Input DI Meta Incoming. In these videos, Leffen suggested that 1.0 Cardinal gave a game-breaking advantage when it came to DI. He did this by showing that Fox can escape Peach's up throw down smash if he has 1.0 Cardinal DI. However, what Leffen never showed is that this is only true at 0%. If Fox is at even 1%, then 1.0 isn't needed to escape this combo. These types of loopholes were consistent throughout all of Leffen's videos. However, he was able to deceive the masses throughout this time period as they didn't have the game knowledge needed to debunk his lies like I do. The perfect example of Leffen's fear-mongering can be seen in this Tafikins tweet, which cast doubt about 1.0 Cardinal. Leffen immediately responded to this tweet by reinforcing his lies, which the entire community adopted during that time period. On March 24th, the local tournament called Royal Flush announced that I'd been invited to compete on the box. Leffen then hounded the tournament organizers to ban the box within 2 hours of their tweet, which caused them to revoke their invite. However, I still went to Royal Flush so that I could see people demo software mods for GameCube controllers that I was advocating for at the time. This was when I found out that the entire reason Leffen had befriended my engineer was to attempt to steal a modded GameCube controller from us. When I got to Royal Flush, I had to stop my engineer from giving one of our controllers to Leffen at the very last minute. Leffen would later spread rumors about this interaction that weren't true whatsoever. Leffen claimed that I'd stolen a GameCube controller from him and that I'd harassed him for no reason, when what I'd done that weekend was confront him about how he'd been sabotaging me. These rumors, which have persisted up until this day and can be seen in these tweets, are complete misrepresentations. Within the span of 2 months, Leffen would upload 6 YouTube videos that were either directly or indirectly intended to serve as anti-box propaganda. Leffen's videos ranged from exaggerating about game mechanics to discrediting the need for the box as an ergonomic controller. He uploaded videos at a rate of about 1 every 10 days, which caused me an unbelievable amount of stress at the time. This, on top of everything else Leffen had been doing, caused me to call him out on Twitter on June 3rd, 2017. My tweet was in reference to him losing to Zane at Smash and Splash 3. At first, Leffen didn't respond to my tweet, but later that night, he went all out by leaking logs from 2016 in which I told him that I had PTSD from the abuse that caused me to testify for Evidence.zip. Leffen didn't even hesitate to leak the fact that I'd come to him with that information. This is consistent with several Evidence.zip testimonies such as Mike Hager's, which read, "At Beast 2, a large international tournament, I decided to tell some people in the Swedish scene about something very personal. I suffer from mental illness in the form of recurring depressions, and I'm possibly bipolar type 2. I thought I could trust these people, and I could, with one exception. I knew that Leffen was a rude, spoiled, and disrespectful person, but I couldn't believe that someone would be so evil to spread this information around." This testimony shows that Leffen will not hesitate to blackmail people in order to get what he wants. It's practically second nature for him to blackmail, which is something to keep in mind throughout this video. One of the most egregious aspects of Leffen's blackmail was that he blackmailed me with trauma that he caused me. Right after Leffen leaked this information, he tweeted that he'd tried to be nice to me despite how terrible I'd been to him. I want to be clear that at no point did I ever do anything that even resembled being terrible to Leffen, and so this tweet should be viewed as Leffen looking to fully distort reality. People then began to pressure Leffen about the fact that he had the audacity to post those logs, which he quickly bailed himself out of by claiming that he couldn't take my harassment anymore. This was yet another lie. Someone named Mershak continued to pressure Leffen about his claims, at which point Leffen claimed that I was not only harassive toward him, but also his stalker. Leffen's choice to use this insult in particular can be explained by something called projection, which is when someone dumps something they know to be true about themselves onto someone else. This means that by claiming I was his stalker, Leffen was revealing the fact that he stalks me, which should be obvious by this point. This also continues to show Leffen's tendency to flip the situation on his victims by making it seem as though they're the ones who are abusing him. Even after that interaction, Mershak continued to refute everything Leffen was saying. This led to Leffen pulling the victim card on Mershak, which fully took away Mershak's ability to continue. Leffen wrote, "Done arguing with you since you insist on victim blaming." As we know, Leffen's tendency to pull the victim card was thoroughly documented in Evidence.zip. Unfortunately, Mershak didn't know this. Something else to note about the tweet I just showed you is that Leffen didn't just pull the victim card. He also justified his decision to leak the logs by saying that what he posted was only a small part. This meant that he had a lot more in store, which was true. The way Leffen publicly announced this threat kept me silent throughout the rest of the box legality process, which Leffen took full advantage of. On June 9, 2017, I publicized information about the software mods that Leffen had tried to sabotage by stealing a controller from my engineer. Leffen quickly tweeted to encourage people not to trust my publications and to view them as cigarette company-funded research. Leffen then took to YouTube to slander my work with propaganda. This is egregious because the work I was doing during that time period was what led to UCF, which meant Leffen had no issue with jeopardizing UCF in order to get rid of me. On April 16, 2018, I posted a 149-page manifesto that thoroughly documented all of the box's functionality. Leffen tweeted within 1 hour to make the exact same tweet as a year before in order to urge people not to trust my manifesto. This is egregious because the box manifesto is what would enable thousands of people with hand and wrist issues to continue playing Melee, and so by no means was it okay that Leffen was willing to put it in jeopardy. Leffen's tweet is even more egregious when you consider that certain chapters in the box manifesto were specifically written in order to debunk lies he'd been spreading, such as this chapter on 1.0 Cardinal. I should mention that the lies Leffen spread about 1.0 Cardinal have damaged the community extensively, as they're a big part of the reason it isn't currently fixed on UCF. Despite the fact that Leffen failed to ban the box, his harassment wouldn't stop there. As time went on, Leffen would continue to spread lies or half-truths about the box whenever he could, such as this post in which he claimed the box had magic DI. These types of posts would cause misinformation to spread throughout the community, which, as we know, Leffen doesn't take issue with. Leffen's next major offense against me would happen on the night the Metagame documentary debuted. One of the tweets Leffen made that night in order to discredit Evidence.zip was this one, which read, "Reminder that Evidence.zip was written by Hax because he blamed me for his insomnia." Not only did this tweet recklessly leak information about trauma I've been past for years now, but it's also a complete lie, as well as blatantly disrespectful toward all the people who Leffen abused. This tweet alone should throw any idea that Leffen has reformed out the window. When I saw Leffen's tweet, I couldn't believe that he'd go so far as to manipulate the community, and so I responded by letting people know that Evidence.zip was created because of Leffen's psychopathic behavior. There's a quote from Evidence.zip that best describes what happens next. The quote reads, "The problem is that Leffen can't take a joke and will start an ambitious vendetta with people over almost nothing. This has caused massive drama in the Swedish scene and has changed the mood of the Smash scene. It causes fear and a tense atmosphere." What this quote tells you is that once you poke the hornet's nest, Leffen will go balls to the wall crazy in terms of how he'll lash back at you. After I called Leffen a psychopath, he proceeded to take revenge on me in indescribable ways. On December 28, 2020, I announced to the community that I'd be taking Hax's Nightclub online to provide the East Coast with a free tournament series during the pandemic. Hax's Nightclub then had its first online event on January 2nd. The event had 567 entrants and was a huge success. Once Leffen saw that Hax's Nightclub had done so well, he decided to interfere the very next day. Leffen did so by announcing that he'd be setting up a weekly series called Levo. Normally, this would have been a flagrant breach of community policy since Levo was scheduled to overlap with Hax's Nightclub on Saturdays. However, Leffen intentionally started Levo as an EU-only tournament in order to bypass this policy by setting up a long con. Once you know how Leffen operates, it's very easy to predict what he'll do next in this situation. Within a few weeks, Leffen was inevitably going to overrun Hax's Nightclub in a way that people wouldn't detect. The way the tournament calendar looked back then was as follows. Hax's Nightclub took place on January 2nd, Gallant was scheduled to take place on January 9th, and Frame Perfect was scheduled to take place on January 16th. This meant that January 23rd was open. At Gallant, I ran ads that announced that the next Hax's Nightclub would take place on the 23rd. I also announced this date in my public Discord server. On January 14th, the inevitable happened when Leffen tweeted that the Levo that would take place on January 23rd would be adding a North American bracket. As innocuous as this tweet may seem, it marked the completion of the overrun, since Levo had now been placed atop Hax's Nightclub. This is yet another egregious con because it shows not only the willful and malicious intent to continue targeting me, but also the willingness to breach community policy in order to do so. The worst part is that Levo also requires people to sub to Leffen in order to enter, whereas Hax's Nightclub was a free service, which means that Leffen didn't care that he'd be depriving the community of a superior service by conning me. This shouldn't come as a surprise though, considering how he disrupted my attempts to help the community during the box and UCF phase. Believe it or not, Leffen would launch yet another con on me during this time period. This con, in my opinion, is much worse than the Hax's Nightclub con, since it caused damaging false information to spread throughout the community. The con began on January 5th when Leffen claimed that he'd be streaming a review of the box. Since we know how Leffen operates by now, it should be obvious that this was going to be much more than just a review. As soon as Leffen unpackaged the box he'd received in the mail, he immediately began criticizing as many small things as he could about it. Leffen's aesthetic criticisms were irrelevant, but there was one criticism in particular that would end up causing massive damage to the community.
For me, I might actually swap so that this button is Z, so I can grab like this, and so that I can L cancel with R. Because I think L canceling with R is better than with light. A lot of people will not agree with me, but I am very sure about it.
Leffen had begun to spout factually incorrect information about L canceling by telling people that hard press L cancels are better than light press L cancels. He was then using that information to tell people that the box is designed incorrectly and that 2 of its button locations should be swapped. To show you what I mean, here's a diagram of the box's button layout. As you can see, the Z button is on the home row on the default layout. Leffen was advising people to swap Z with R because doing so would allegedly give them a better L canceling method. What Leffen didn't know, however, was that not only was he wrong in telling people that it's better to hard press L cancel, but that swapping the locations of these 2 buttons causes several other problems as well. It's always better to L cancel with Z than with R because it doesn't lock you out of tech, for anyone wondering. From there, the other problems I'm referring to range from unergonomic motions to techniques like wave dash at a light shield being dysfunctional since they require you to cross rows. My point is that Leffen's layout should basically be viewed as a defective product. The moment we saw that Leffen was advising people to use his layout, representatives of my company began going into his stream to instruct him to stop. What Leffen would then do is insult and ban my representatives who tried to tell him that he was spreading false information. For example, when a representative named Slamus tried to tell Leffen that he was wrong about L canceling, Leffen responded by doing the following.
User Slamus. On timeout, yeah, sounds about right. Melee is not for the average person. Light press, hard press. Yeah, I mean, this guy's just full of shit. Now, I'm not saying, to be clear, that I know the best layout. I'm saying that letting you rebind things is an objectively huge positive. You have to be an absolute fucking moron to try to say that not being able to remap is better because your overlord said so.
Leffen not only roasted and banned Slamus, but he also began to refer to me as an evil overlord, which shows how personally invested he was in the situation. Leffen would then continue to repeat false information about L canceling while over 1,000 viewers watched. Later that night, another representative named Altimore tried to stop Leffen to no avail. Altimore could barely hold a conversation with Leffen without Leffen weaving around his arguments in some way or another. 2 weeks later, the exact same thing happened when another representative named Otak confronted Leffen about the fact that he'd been lying for 2 weeks straight by that point. Just like with Altimore, Leffen repeatedly insulted Otak and used circular language that made it impossible to hold the conversation. While all of this went on, Leffen willfully and maliciously implemented chat commands within his Twitch stream which advised people to hard press L cancel and use his button layout. Leffen would spread the same false information day after day after day and ignore all of my representatives' requests to stop doing so. He would also make comments like these while streaming.
You know, for the layout stuff, like for the box layout, it's actually crazy how much better my layout is. The more I play and the more I think about things, the more I realize like how bad the default one is.
Everything Leffen did throughout this con reveals a high degree of narcissism. Leffen made it his goal to coin a Leffen layout at all costs, even if that layout would be damaging to the community. For one, the fact that Leffen interfered with my company's product to this degree is unlawful. Secondly, Leffen lied about L canceling for a month straight, which caused hundreds of amateur players to believe that they should use the wrong L canceling method. This led to me spending a week making a detailed L canceling tutorial that I posted on February 21st. Unfortunately, this is yet another situation where Leffen's lie persists regardless of whether the tutorial is made or not, as I could never possibly compete with his influence. Right after I made my tutorial, Axe DM'd me to thank me for making it. He said that he didn't know why so many people had been L canceling the wrong way lately, and so I told him the truth, which was that we couldn't get Leffen to stop lying. These are the types of ridiculous breaches of top player policy that Leffen commits behind the scenes. The way Leffen lied about L canceling for his own benefit was identical to the way he lied about 1.0 Cardinal 4 years prior, except this time he had even more of a social media following to make the lie ripple throughout the community. After all these years of con artistry toward my products and services, Leffen would make the following comment.
I am also biased against the box for reasons I will not talk about here. So keep in mind that I am inclined to be biased. You should always be wary that people can be biased in your interviews.
What this comment tells you is that everything Leffen did to me was vengeful, if that wasn't obvious enough. The entire box legality con was vengeful, as was everything else. Leffen attempted to stifle every single project of mine, then walked away as if nothing ever happened. To recap this chapter, I want to emphasize how egregious the stalking and harassment I've been subject to for the past 10 years has been. In 2013, I testified against Leffen in order to put an end to 2 years of stalking and harassment that had taken place on Smashboards. Leffen quickly manipulated his way out of the Evidence.zip allegations, and then half a year later, I found him in my EVO 2013 hotel room on the very first night. Leffen would also make efforts to befriend a close friend of mine throughout that weekend as to create problems. 4 years later, Leffen responded to my announcement that I'd be returning to Melee on the box by spreading tons of false info on the exact same day. He then manipulated me into having a conversation with him at Summit, which he later reworded on social media. On March 24, 2017, Leffen got me banned from a local tournament within 2 hours of them inviting me. He then uploaded 6 propaganda videos within a 2-month time span. Leffen also befriended my engineer during this time period in order to manipulate him into handing over a modded GameCube controller. After I stopped my engineer from giving a controller to Leffen, Leffen went on social media and claimed that I'd stolen a controller from him and harassed him. After withstanding all of this abuse, I finally confronted Leffen on June 3, 2017. Leffen immediately responded by leaking logs in which I told him I had PTSD from the initial round of stalking. He then told social media that I was his stalker and claimed victim status. On June 9, 2017, I publicized my GameCube controller project. Leffen responded 2 hours later to tell people not to trust my work. A year later, I publicized box documentation. Leffen responded 1 hour later to do the same thing. As time went on, Leffen would continue to spread lies and rumors about the box whenever he could. Then, on December 12, 2020, he once again leaked information about the trauma I used to have in order to discredit the Metagame broadcast. After I stood up for myself, Leffen decided to take revenge on me in several ways. On January 2, 2021, I hosted an online Hax's nightclub, which was hugely successful. Leffen intervened the very next day by setting up Levo in order to overrun Hax's nightclub. Leffen also began to intervene with the box's politics once again by misleading people into believing that they should use his button layout. This caused massive damage to the box community throughout the entire month of January. Finally, I've managed to find myself banned for being a threat to Leffen's safety. This largely happened because of the way Leffen victimized himself after I uploaded Evidence.zip 2, which I'm hopeful people can see through by now. One last thing to pay attention to is how promptly Leffen responded to several of the things I did, as well as the way he scouted out who I was friends with in order to infiltrate my relationships. Believe it or not, this has been going on for the past 10 years. With that being said, here's the list of charges from this chapter. Now that you have an idea of how predatory Leffen is, I want you to know that everything that happened to HBox starting in 2017 was a lie. Everything from top to bottom was a lie that never should have been trusted for even a split second. I was able to see through all of it knowing what I knew, and I've had several conversations with HBox in which I explained what happened to him. HBox has told me that he could feel that what Leffen did to him was calculated, to which I've explained to him just how calculated it was. There's an excerpt from Evidence.zip that you should know about before we get into the HBox Con. It reads, "Other things Leffen's done include spreading false rumors about people and telling people's personal information to others, something smashers like Mike Hager and C have fallen victim to. He also lies to make himself seem better or as being on the right side, and his lies have on multiple occasions caused other smashers to become angry with each other. In some cases, he's even manipulated people into hating each other. Everything that happens to HBox will be a massive evolution of this quote." What happened to HBox can be summed up as follows. Leffen saw that HBox's popularity had dipped after he won the Big House 7, and so he took the opportunity to ruin his career through rumors and lies. At first, Leffen gave a post-game interview at the Big House 7 in which he had nothing but good things to say about HBox. But after Leffen got home, he saw that the community had turned on HBox, and so he joined in on the dog pile on October 23, 2017. Mershak, the same person who called out Leffen earlier that year, called him out again for how snake-like this 180 of his was. Leffen would continue to fuel the dog pile just a few days later by steering it in the worst possible direction. He began to muddle the lines between HBox being a bad player and a bad person, which are two drastically different things. The important thing to pay attention to from here is just how far Leffen's lies will spiral out of control and initiate the destruction of HBox's reputation. Because I knew all too well what was about to happen to HBox, I desperately tried to talk Leffen out of it at Summit 5. I repeatedly told Leffen that HBox didn't deserve what Leffen was about to do to him, and that Leffen was a hypocrite for criticizing anyone for treating others poorly. I also happened to know that Leffen had blackmail on HBox, and so I urged him not to use it. Unfortunately, talking to Leffen was like talking to an emotionless cyborg. He kept giving me responses that evaded what I was saying entirely. It was like talking to a robot that was programmed to destroy HBox. Shortly after Summit 5, Leffen would continue to make misrepresentations that didn't have a shred of truth behind them. A key interaction happened when Leffen tweeted, "Pretty easy to not get sick when no one sits next to you outside of tournaments, huh?" as to create the illusion that top players kept their distance from HBox. HBox then stood up for himself, to which Leffen immediately responded by threatening to release the personal info I mentioned. I happen to know exactly what Leffen was threatening to release here, and I also happen to know that it's what kept HBox silent throughout the remainder of their feud. This is yet another example of how poking the hornet's nest will cause Leffen to go insane. Mike Hager's Evidence.zip testimony explains this by talking about how when he would prank Leffen in response to his abuse, Leffen would lash back disproportionately. Mike Hager wrote, "If you do something that's even a tenth as bad as what he's done to people, he views it as way worse. He has absolutely no self-awareness. Maybe he will gain some if he's banned." Leffen would begin to spread anti-HBox propaganda during this time period. This was identical to how he layered propaganda with blackmail during the box legality process. The absolute worst instance of propaganda came in January 2018. This was when Leffen made a video titled, "One of the Many Reasons to Dislike HBox," which received 400,000 views. The video title was manipulative in itself since it suggested that there were in fact many reasons to dislike HBox, yet the video hardly explained any of them. Within the video, Leffen sits next to a player named Snowy who tells a story about how HBox was crappy to him when they met. However, now that we have insight into how malicious Leffen really is, it's obvious that Snowy was used in this situation. This is why it was so easy for me to find tweets of Leffen referring to Snowy as his slave and abusing him in other ways later down the line. Leffen didn't need Snowy for anything past adding credibility to his smear campaign, but Snowy was probably too starstruck to realize that. Leffen would also censor HBox's name in his Twitch chat during this time period in order to ramp up his campaign. Leffen's video with Snowy would spawn memes about how HBox wasn't just crappy within that one interaction, but within every interaction. People clearly underestimated just how far these jokes could go. A few months later, HBox tweeted about the fact that he'd been harassed in person while shopping at Walmart. HBox wrote, "This is what is encouraged when you roll along with a long overdone joke at the expense of someone." He also had to ask people to be respectful of him when they saw him in person and began to show signs that he was second-guessing his career choice. Leffen would end up taking advantage of HBox's moment of weakness. Another few months later, Leffen misrepresented an interaction that took place between him and HBox at Summit 6. I happen to know that at this tournament, HBox politely approached Leffen to ask him to squash their beef. Leffen not only declined HBox's invitation, but later went on social media and claimed that HBox had begged him to be unblocked and called him a sociopath. The fact that Leffen called HBox a sociopath is an extremely revealing projection. Just like when he called me his stalker a year prior, Leffen was revealing things that he knows to be true about himself, which he tends to do whenever he insults people. Furthermore, C's Evidence.zip testimony provides insight into why Leffen declined HBox's request to make amends. C's testimony reads, "I've tried contacting and talking to Leffen on several occasions since the trip, both IRL and online, as you might have figured out by now, without any result. But with a pounding heart, I wasn't going to take no for an answer, and after having reached out several times just to be dismissed and ignored, he realized I wasn't giving in to his hatred, so he made a promise to contact me when he got the time for it. Sadly, this never happened, or shall I say, hasn't happened, because as you might understand, I still wish he would start opening up to people, talking to them and explaining his issues if there are any. But he seems to be less interested in keeping a healthy relationship with his prospects. In fact, it seems he thrives on making other people miserable by acting malicious towards them, spreading false rumors and manipulating people into disliking them. This quote reveals that Leffen is a highly sadistic individual who will decline to speak to his victims and then rephrase their attempts to talk to him in the most vindictive way possible."
Oil and water a little bit.
Leffen frequently tweets about, such and such, like, I can't believe this terrible human being. He doesn't say terrible, player. He says terrible human being.
Yeah, it's gotten to that level.
It's gotten to that level. Is killing the game that I love. Leffen's maybe a little bit melodramatic about it, but
maybe a little, but that's what we like about him.
Yeah.
Because no one from the current generation knew any of this, Leffen's lies about HBox would be taken seriously by many reputable sources. Commentators like Scar and Toph would reverberate Leffen's lies throughout the EVO 2018 stadium, and Leffen himself would tell his lies to media outlets such as ESPN. All of this culminated in HBox being fully socially isolated, which he finally lashed out about at Smash Con 2018. People had begun to criticize HBox for the smallest things by that point, and so he rightfully let out his frustrations. Leffen then reared his head to reveal his true motivations by encouraging people to exile HBox from the community. After having single-handedly crafted this entire narrative, Leffen urged people not to sympathize with HBox during his moment of weakness. Leffen also made a comment that took away HBox's ability to play the victim card, which is extremely significant. I say this because Leffen's mastery over the victim card has been well documented ever since Evidence.zip, and so this tells us that his mastery works both ways. What Leffen does is he isolates his target, then takes away their victim card preemptively so that they have nothing to fall back on. To show you how stealthy the manipulation that took place right in front of everybody was, let's juxtapose Genesis 5 and Genesis 6. At Genesis 5, Leffen didn't shake hands with HBox in order to further the narrative that HBox is deplorable. This was an emotionally manipulative maneuver that evoked a reaction from HBox, which damaged his reputation even further.
Winners finals. That was for winners finals?
Yep.
Oh boy.
Yeah, no.
Hey,
Hungrybox sit clean as usual.
That's not a good. Don't.
What happened?
I mean, they're doing the chant.
By Genesis 6, the hatred for HBox had reached the point that the crowd began to chant vulgarities after he beat Pew. Pew tweeted in good faith to tell the crowd to be respectful, but what Pew and the others who tried to get the crowd to calm down didn't catch was when Leffen stepped in to capitalize on the situation. After conning HBox out of his rep for an entire year, Leffen had the audacity to step in and tell the crowd to calm down as well. HBox's mother responded to Leffen's tweet to tell him to not even dare after what he'd done to her son, but Leffen obviously wasn't going to respond to her tweet. At this point, I'd like to re-emphasize the Evidence.zip quote in which C said that the vastness and level of psychological warfare Leffen exhibits toward his prospects is one of the most elaborate acts of vicious intent imaginable. This quote explains why only people like me, HBox, and his mother could piece together everything that happened during this time period. It also shows why Leffen poses such an extreme danger to the masses. Because Leffen's social engineering is very hidden, it leaves people not knowing where it ever came from. The puppeteer within this community is clearly Leffen, but this Reddit thread proves that people struggle to identify that, since its title seems to suggest that the HBox hatred came out of nowhere. Just now, I brought up a concept called social engineering that I'll need you to keep in mind. Social engineering refers to the use of centralized planning in an attempt to manage social change and regulate the future development and behavior of a society. Social engineering can essentially be thought of as the art of manipulating the masses in favorable ways. This is an important concept when it comes to understanding Leffen. The HBox Con can be considered a socio-economic transaction in which everything Leffen did was intended to drain HBox while simultaneously boosting Leffen. Leffen urging the Genesis 6 crowd to calm down shows just how far he will go in order to milk these transactions. The next stage of the HBox Con would take place on February 7, 2019, just 4 days after Genesis 6. On February 7th, Leffen uploaded a video that suggested that Jigglypuff may need to be banned, which got 240,000 views. This video was blatantly an extension of the HBox Con, but that wasn't provable, which leads me to a new term, plausible deniability. Plausible deniability is the term for when someone retains the ability to deny responsibility for any damnable actions because of a lack of evidence that would definitively prove their participation. The reason Leffen needed plausible deniability in this situation was because he had just told the Genesis 6 crowd to calm down, so if he were to have directly smeared HBox, people would have called him out for it. Therefore, Leffen took the workaround of smearing Jigglypuff instead in order to give himself plausible deniability. This means that if someone were to have asked Leffen, "Didn't you just tell us to calm down a few days ago?" he could have simply responded by saying, "Huh? I'm not inciting any HBox hatred with this video." Plausible deniability is classic manipulation that people shouldn't fall for, as what it did was allow Leffen to continue the con without it being attributable to him. It was a sneaky way for Leffen to continue to con HBox just days after making himself the good guy. As soon as Snowy, the up-and-coming player who starred in Leffen's first video, saw that Leffen had begun to influence the community toward banning Jigglypuff, he stepped in to speak out. This was when Leffen broke the news to Snowy that he was never needed for anything past initiating the smear campaign, or maybe some occasional Jigglypuff practice. Leffen even called Snowy a liar for thinking it was acceptable to not hate Jigglypuff. So much for that friendship. Something I explained at the beginning of this video is that Leffen's influence tends to have a butterfly effect. I brought this up in reference to the fact that Sky Williams' life realistically never would have been ruined if Leffen had never existed, so now I'll bring up something else to consider. Hungrybox would never have had a crab thrown at him if not for Leffen. I say this because the entire crab situation snowballed from lies that Leffen began to tell in October 2017, which, technically speaking, snowballed from warnings the Swedes tried to give us 8 years ago. Another backwards aspect of the HBox Con is that Leffen actually managed to heroize himself through it. Most people quickly forgot that HBox wasn't an evil villain until Leffen told them he was, and so Leffen was able to walk away an even bigger beneficiary. This is yet another example of how Leffen milks these transactions for all they're worth. Even though the HBox Con is mostly over, there are still signs that point toward HBox being watched. For example, in 2020, Leffen made a video to capitalize on the possibility that HBox would be retiring, and in 2021, he threw defamation HBox's way for no reason on Twitter. Leffen was also prepared to circulate HBox allegations during last summer's MeToo movement once people started to murmur about them. The point is that HBox is still secretly on Leffen's radar, although not to the same degree that I am. Leffen has somehow made these types of vendettas normal within the Smash community. One last thing I have to say about this chapter is that it reveals how hypocritical my ban statement is. I'd like to reiterate that Evidence.zip 2, for the most part, wasn't defamatory because all of my claims were factual and credible. What Leffen did to Hbox in 2018, on the other hand, was purely defamatory, yet Leffen faced no accountability for it. Here's the list of charges for this chapter. The next con that took place would happen in 2020. I want to start by emphasizing that the MeToo Con is the most dark and disturbing con in this video, and that it may be tough to process that Leffen actually did what he did within this con. I've seen a lot of people respond to Evidence.zip 2 by not wanting to accept the truth about the MeToo Con, which I can't blame them for. I'm legitimately sorry that this is a subject that has to be included within this video, and so I ask that you remember that I'm not the one who perpetrated it. Based on the response I saw to Evidence.zip 2, it may be advisable to skip this chapter if you struggle to stomach its contents. Last summer, the Smash community witnessed its darkest point when it found out that many of its own were sexual predators. Most people seem to be naive about the fact that something like this could ever be true. Even more disturbingly, some people had the audacity to take advantage of the community while it was in its state of paralysis. On July 2nd, 2020, Leffen took the helm of the MeToo movement with a video that would receive 800,000 views. Leffen would also release another video a few weeks later that received 300,000 views. These videos initiated one of the most disturbing things to ever happen to the Smash community, which was Leffen hijacking a MeToo movement. The moment I saw what Leffen had done, I reached out to Mike Haggar. Him and I were among the last ones left who knew what was really going on here. Mike Haggar described what was happening as sickening. However, hardly anyone from the current generation knew the truth, as evidenced by the like-to-dislike ratios on Leffen's videos. The dark truth is that Leffen capitalized on last summer's MeToo movement in order to perform social engineering. The way Leffen spoke within his YouTube videos reveal how skilled of a manipulator he really is. However, his true motivations become obvious once you listen to some of the comments he made, which make no sense in retrospect. I'll show you a few examples.
I think I made a name for myself pretty quickly in the community, and I definitely did not do everything right. People know about the Evidence.zip, and although I do not think that that was deserved, like being banned for it, I do definitely agree that I acted like a fucking jerk, and that I need to do I need to be much, much better going forward, is what I realized.
This quote from Leffen is bogus. Leffen has been concealing the truth about Evidence.zip for his entire career so that he can continue to manipulate people.
Some people in this community, whether you like it or not, have some kind of power, whether it's being a top player, a TO, a just community figure, whatever it is. It really does seem like people just take whatever they can and just use it to either abuse, blackmail, or try to hide what they have done.
This is yet another bogus quote. Leffen is consistently the most abusive person in the community, and he constantly uses blackmail as one of his trademark strategies.
Seeing what these people that I thought they were my friends, or at least people I knew, do such disgusting things, right? I never could have imagined that they would do such disgusting things. And then instead of apologizing or owning up to what they did, they try to lie and manipulate people instead.
Finally, this is the most egregious quote of all, especially considering the perspective we have now. As you'll recall, Leffen immediately sought to lie and manipulate people in response to my Evidence.zip 2 allegations, just as he did in response to Evidence.zip 8 years ago. At this point, we can conclude that all of Leffen's quotes are projections of the inner self. The most egregious thing Leffen did within his videos, however, was give a false victim testimony. Before I show you the testimony itself, I want to show you what Leffen prefaces it with.
That said, though, I do think in general, as a general, you need to believe victims, especially if they don't have a very credible reason to lie. And even then, I generally think you should start out by believing them.
This statement is intended to condition the viewer to believe victims, which Leffen will take advantage of shortly afterward. While it's fine to default to believing victims, what Leffen is doing here is ensuring that the viewer believes victims in this specific moment so that he can take advantage of their trust. 3 minutes after the statement I just showed you, Leffen gives a false victim testimony. Since his testimony lasts about 3 minutes, I've condensed it to the most important parts.
When before I was banned, I went to my first tournament over in the United States, and I've told this story many times before, so I'm not going to go into great detail about it. But as a 16-year-old, I went there, traveled with an RV around the around California and the nearby states for about 2 weeks, and there were about 10 people in that RV. So it was a lot of people, many people, adults. And during this time, there was one particular player that physically abused me, like basically slapped me extremely hard across the face several times over basically nothing. And took about 8 times before someone said anything, and no one really said anything. But since that day, I was obviously extremely mad at the other people who I looked up to before, who I saw as full grown adults, for not doing anything. And ever since that day, I basically vowed to myself that when that happens next time, when I'm the fucking adult, I'm not gonna just sit by and just be like, oh, I hope someone else look to someone else. I'm gonna step in myself.
This testimony is fully and utterly false. The best source for proving this is actually Leffen himself. In 2012, Leffen publicly discussed this interaction on Smashboards, and he clearly stated that he'd only been slapped once. Yet in 2020, he claimed that he had been slapped 8 times. This is a wildly different allegation that changes the severity of the assault by a huge amount. As soon as I heard Leffen's new testimony, I reached out to 2 Swedes who were on the road trip being referenced. Zoller, the first Swede who I reached out to, stated that Leffen had been slapped 2 times at maximum. Zoller added that Leffen is the type of person to attempt this type of deception so long as he thinks he can get away with it. Armada was the next Swede I reached out to. Armada confirmed that Leffen had been slapped 2 times at maximum. Armada added that Leffen had been lying about this exact story just a few weeks prior on his stream. That brings me to C's Evidence.zip testimony. C is the person on the other end of Leffen's MeToo testimony, and what Leffen didn't know when he gave his testimony was that C testified about this exact story 8 years ago. C's testimony went into great detail about every interaction during this road trip. He began his testimony with, "It would take me forever to account for all the times I've seen Leffen acting out viciously against his prospects, so I'm only going to account for the timeline revolving around the Genesis trip." For perspective, Leffen had constantly harassed C prior to this road trip, but luckily C decided to testify about the road trip in particular. C's testimony is quite long, and so I'll only be providing excerpts from it. The excerpts range from how C experienced massive psychological warfare during the road trip, which he tried his hardest to resist snapping in response to. C explained how everything Leffen did was intended to ruin the trip for C, even going as far as to turn the lights on in order to keep C up at night and maximizing the TV's volume in order to prevent him from sleeping. Leffen would also refuse to be reasonable with C whenever C would try to interact with him. The most notable part of C's testimony by far, though, is when he says, even though Leffen failed his attempt to ruin the hike, he did manage to bring forth a reaction that he later on easily manipulated and colored up with systematic lies and bullshit that shadows everything that he says, making the only person who actually cared enough to fight for him being included on the trip look like the villain. And some people actually buy this crap. This paragraph references when C slapped Leffen once in response to an indescribable amount of abuse. This paragraph also reveals that Leffen has been vilifying C by embellishing this story for many, many years. The last relevant part of C's testimony is the one where he explains how the plane trip home to Sweden went. Leffen left this part of the story out of his MeToo video because it reveals that he physically assaulted C during the trip home. What happened was Leffen was seated in front of C, and so Leffen decided to jam his plane seat backwards, which hurt C's knees. C then asked Leffen not to do that again. Leffen then jammed his plane seat into C's knees again, which caused C to suffer from knee pain for several weeks. C then slapped Leffen in self-defense. This is the second slap that Zoller and Armada referenced in their recent testimonies. Leffen conveniently left out this part of the story because it shows that he's guilty of the worst physical assault that took place. The reason this is all so significant is because Leffen fraudulently used this story to make it seem as though he could resonate with sexual assault victims. There's no world in which this story deserves to be used as a way of resonating with innocent people who did nothing to deserve the horrors they experienced. Furthermore, this means that Leffen typed out every single one of the tweets you're reading without meaning a word that he said. Leffen had the sheer audacity to make these tweets in order to virtue signal and mobilize people. This wasn't out of the ordinary for him at all if you'd known about his true nature, but people from today's generation weren't aware. Plenty of people would respond to Leffen gratefully for his leadership, but what none of them realized was that they were dealing with the coldest manipulator in the entire community. Mighty Keith, for example, wrote, "Leffen is a perfect example of how Smash leaders with big platforms can advocate for victims and be a safe haven. If all the other Smash leaders can continue to do the same, then Smash will have a bright future." It's awfully sad reading the follow-up to this tweet, which goes, "I'm just highlighting Leffen right now because I'm not sure if anyone else could have pulled the curtains back on Zero the way that he did. Talk about not aging well." A few months ago, I reached out to C to ask him what he thought about what Leffen said during his testimony. C said that it was beyond him how Leffen could make up so many lies, and that Leffen seems to have no contact with reality. C wrote, "He's just trying to justify his hatred and malicious actions and intentions with lies. He's so corrupt at heart that it's unfathomable. He will try anything as long as he thinks he can get away with it, and seeing as how I'm not part of the scene anymore, he feels he can make up any allegations and lies he wants and get away with it. I can only hope that people have opened their eyes to the type of sociopath he is and can see through his compulsory attempts at deception. It truly is sickening." C continued by saying, "He has zero regards for the truth. He truly only cares about portraying himself as the victim/good guy and others as the perpetrators/bad guys with any means at any cost." C also clarified that he slapped Leffen once during the road trip and another time during the flight home, which confirms that the assault Leffen described in his MeToo video was a lie. Now that we have more insight into Leffen's character, it shouldn't surprise you at all that he conspired with Jisoo to cancel Zero last summer. Leffen also indirectly enabled Sky Williams' cancellation in doing so. The point is that Leffen should be viewed as someone with zero morality, someone who will take advantage of literally any situation in order to perform social engineering. Outright lying to people about being able to relate to their victim experiences isn't an issue for Leffen. After I released Evidence.zip 2, someone contacted me to show me that Leffen took advantage of Me Too in yet another malicious way. On the day rumors about M2K sexually assaulting someone arose, Leffen immediately capitalized by circulating the rumors within his Twitch chat. Leffen wrote, "Take the allegations as plausible and see what he says. And you need to make sure the person accused responds if it's something serious. Obviously, a ton of these things are very hard to prove and disprove, but many of them end up clear as day once the abuser confesses." Leffen added, "To be clear, ejaculating on someone's bed is bad. Ejaculating on someone is really fucking bad." What none of the people in Leffen's chat knew, however, was that not only is spreading rumors right up Leffen's alley, but that he'd hijacked the entire Me Too movement with these types of motivations in the first place. Shortly afterward, M2K was forced to respond with a video that revealed extremely personal information. M2K's video received 1.2 million hits and ended up being completely unnecessary because the rumors that were being spread about him were never true. Although it can't be definitively proven, there's a very real chance that Leffen circulating the rumors about M2K is what caused M2K to have to make his video. Leffen would later make a massively deceptive tweet once people began pressuring him about his involvement. Leffen's tweet read, "Any comment that I started the rumor about M2K is false. I was streaming and people posted his name in chat, and I posted asking about it. The VOD is here and you can check." Very brave for M2K to go out with what he said though. I feel extremely bad for him. This tweet is outright manipulative since it weaves around the fact that Leffen circulated the rumor. The compliment Leffen gives at the end is reviling as well. Several people who saw Leffen's tweet responded by saying that they felt the way Leffen had circulated the rumor was, in fact, the reason M2K ended up being forced to respond, but Leffen obviously didn't respond to them. During the Me Too movement, Leffen would also display an incredible amount of viciousness towards Zero, who he was intent on canceling for strategic purposes. Leffen would encourage his following to mob Zero to the hardest degree possible, even going as far as to ignore Zero's request to speak in private. This is once again explained by the excerpt from C's testimony that explains how Leffen will refuse to speak to his victims and instead isolate them by vilifying them on social media. To reiterate, C wrote, "Leffen seems to be less interested in keeping a healthy relationship with his prospects. In fact, it seems he thrives on making other people miserable by acting malicious towards them, spreading false rumors and manipulating people into disliking them. With this quote in mind, Zero never had a chance of speaking to Leffen in this situation." Even though Zero was officially deemed a sex offender by then, many people pointed out that Leffen's behavior was unbelievably cold. It seemed that Leffen was void of basic human decency, which several people confronted him about. Leffen quickly manipulated his way out of the situation as usual, however. On July 9th, Leffen brutally criticized Zero for making a post about entering therapy. Leffen claimed that Zero was lying to people and manipulating them rather than making an actual apology. We now know this statement to be fully hypocritical given the way Leffen responded to Evidence.zip 1 and 2. Leffen himself is known to lie and manipulate his way out of these types of situations, and so his tweet to Zero was fully disingenuous. A year later, it was revealed that Zero had entered a suicidal state as the result of his downfall. Just like with the M2K situation, there's a strong chance that Leffen caused things to reach this point. Regardless of what offenses Zero committed, anyone with basic human decency would agree that pushing someone to this point is unwarranted, and that's why all eyes were on Leffen when the news came out. Leffen, as usual, manipulated his way out of the situation by claiming that he was sorry to hear the news and that he wished Zero well. I sincerely hope that people are able to see through these types of tweets by now. People may find this tough to stomach, but Leffen's only reason for getting involved with Me Too was to leverage it as maliciously as possible. He never meant a word he said about resonating with victims. His only intentions were to use the movement to gain clout and throw shade other people's way. Leffen indirectly enabled Sky Williams' demise in the process, and pinned innocent people like C as an abuser and M2K as a potential sex offender. Leffen also conspired to pin Zero as a sex offender back when Zero was still innocent, although people overlooked that because Zero was later proven guilty of other charges. The final con I'll be going over is the Metagame Con, which is the most recent media-related con Leffen has performed. The Metagame Con is an extension of the way Leffen has manipulated the media throughout his career in order to conceal the truth about his personality. However, it's by far the most egregious media con, since it involved Samox. For those who don't know, Samox is Melee's most well-respected filmmaker. He's the one who made the Smash Bros. Documentary, which catapulted Melee into the spotlight back in 2013. In December 2020, Samox returned with another documentary called Metagame that focused on the newer generation of players. Samox fulfilled his obligations as a filmmaker by being truthful within Metagame. However, as we know all too well by this point, Leffen has a tendency to raise an issue with the truth being told. The original run of Metagame showed footage of Evidence.zip victims, which made it the current generation's only glimpse at the truth about what happened to those people. Leffen, who wants the current generation to know nothing about why he got banned, took to Twitter on December 12th to discredit the Metagame broadcast. Leffen told an endless amount of lies that night. His lies ranged from Evidence.zip being a conspiracy, to the people behind the ban being abusive toward him and his friends, to making it seem as though he never did anything wrong. Leffen's tweets culminated in a massive lie which suggested that Evidence.zip was never anything more than a collection of forum posts, and that nothing people had just watched was actually real. He also made the tweet in which he suggested that I'd written Evidence.zip all by myself in the midst of a manic episode. The extreme pressure Leffen put on Samox forced Samox to agree to censor future runs of Metagame to not include this type of footage. As the last remaining Evidence.zip victim, witnessing this disturbed me greatly. I was even more disturbed when I saw that 4 months later, Samox announced that he'd be returning with a revised version of Metagame that would include a featured Leffen episode. This was Samox's way of redeeming himself among the current generation. I need to be clear about exactly how serious this is. By telling tons and tons and tons of lies the night Metagame aired, Leffen was able to pressure Samox into releasing propaganda. Not only was Leffen pissing on the graves of the Evidence.zip victims who don't play Melee anymore by doing so, but he was also forcing our premier filmmaker to bend to his will. The revised version of Metagame eventually came out on June 5th. As you can see, Leffen managed to not only get a featured episode, but also the highest priority in terms of interview footage. The revised version of Metagame would end up including 90 minutes of interview footage in which Leffen lied about nearly everything that happened back during the Evidence.zip era. While these interviews were terrible enough on their own, they don't even compare to some of the segments from Leffen's featured episode.
There was an age long ago, ruled by gods. So named for their terrifying power in the only game that matters in the universe, Super Smash Bros. Melee. Many champions tried valiantly to oppose them, sometimes nearly defeating them all, but always falling short. After nearly half a decade of dominance, when things seemed at their most dire, hope found root in an unlikely hero, a Yoshi player named William.
Leffen's featured episode began with an intro that depicted him atop a cross as the one who'd saved the world from the 5 gods. It was a complete 180 from the original run of Metagame, which showed footage of Evidence.zip victims. As bad as this intro was, though, it doesn't even compare to what came next.
After Apex 2013, 2 bombshells dropped. The first was news that Armada would be retiring from the game, fresh off his victory. The second was that Leffen would be banned from Sweden's Smash community for a whole year. Both pieces of news were posted by Armada.
You know, he was the one that posted it, and at that time, everyone was trying to get Armada back, so you did not question Armada at that time. He wasn't really the one behind it, but he stood on the post, so no one can say anything.
The worst part of Leffen's episode by far was what you just saw. The narrative you just heard can't be classified as anything less than a brainwashing attempt on the current generation. It's intended to lead the viewer to believe that Armada randomly banned Leffen while Armada was on his way out, and that Leffen's ban was bound to go through since Armada had a lot of leverage at the time. Again, no mention of Evidence.zip victims. Leffen's episode later transitioned into a narrative that heroized him for seeking revenge on the community that banned him. Even more disturbingly, Leffen was given a theme song that glorified Evidence.zip.
2 years after being banned from his community, Leffen was one set win away from being the first to slay them all, and fulfill his quest to end the era of the Five Gods.
A little thing called evidence.
Something I want to remind people of is the fact that I'm the only person left in the community who could have called this out, since I'm the only one left who testified for Evidence.zip. As the last person left who knows what actually happened here, there are no words to describe the fact that this episode went through. Leffen attempted this thinking that no one would talk about Evidence.zip ever again, at which point I have an obligation to step in. After the rerun of Metagame finished airing, Leffen tweeted, "As a very biased person who was way too harsh on the original watch, I really enjoyed the God Slayer premiere. We don't deserve you, Samox." Leffen then wrote, "Also, Samox did give me the option to watch it 2 days early in case I had any critique. This is a massively corrupt sequence of events that shows the degree to which the scene is bending to Leffen's will. Just so you know what the original run of Metagame contained, Leffen once bullied someone with a hearing aid so badly that they eventually quit the game. Leffen would go out of his way to prevent this person from attending tournament after tournament, even going as far as to manipulate other people into not inviting them to Smash Fests. At one point, the person with the hearing aid had to take a train to a tournament because Leffen cut off all their other routes. Leffen then sat next to them during their tournament sets and screamed in their ear during them. The rerun of Metagame didn't contain any of this information. The reason the Metagame Con bothers me so much is because it technically makes Samox a Leffen victim, since Samox didn't deserve to be placed in this situation. The Metagame Con also sets the precedent that filmmakers who cover Melee are expected to lie when it comes to Leffen, which is extremely unethical. Now that we've gone over all of the cons, the next thing that needs to be discussed is motive. I say this because Leffen's motives will show that this video isn't just being made to hold him accountable for past injustices, but also to prevent future injustices, as his motives reveal a highly predictable trajectory. 8 years ago, C wrote, "You must understand that Leffen has yet proven to show any sign of remorse whatsoever concerning his actions, how they affect people, what they have to go through and put up with, nor how it affects not only them, but poisons the entire atmosphere and well-being of the community as a whole. And until that fact changes, it would be preposterous to invite, accept, or allow this guy anywhere near the people he constantly subjects to acts of malicious intent, not to forget or undermine the urgency in sparing any new potential prospects. The indecency in prolonging this is truly nothing less than an act of cruelty." This quote suggests that C was well aware that Leffen's rampage wouldn't stop until he was banned, and based on the evolution we've seen since then, C was right.
I feel like Leffen often has an agenda in mind when he says something, when he posts something on Twitter.
Just like HBox, Chillin could sense that Leffen had strategic reasons for targeting him, and that Leffen seemed to have an agenda in general. But just like HBox, Chillin seemed to be left dumbfounded as to what that agenda was. Another one of Leffen's targets who could sense the agenda behind Leffen's actions was Salem. Salem seemed to have a better idea of why they were targeted. In years of research, they wrote, "I have no problem with Melee players playing Ultimate. However, I do care about the possibility of them using another Smash game to just grow their own community and then trash the other in one go while I watch this repeating pattern." This quote was in reference to Leffen. As the years have gone by, I've watched a lot of people fall prey to Leffen but not know exactly why they were chosen, so I want to shed some light. In Evidence.zip, there are 2 themes you should know about. The first one is the fact that all 4 of Leffen's victims unanimously agreed that his behavior resembled a vendetta, with 2 of them explicitly using that word. The next theme is the fact that Leffen has a zero-tolerance policy for people with dissenting opinions. One of the testimonies read, "Leffen is extremely rude to people who disagree with him, calling anyone who doesn't share his opinion a moron. If they're worse than him, he says that they don't have enough high-level experience, and therefore their opinion is useless." Other testimonies corroborated this allegation. What I've noticed is that as time went on, these 2 themes would intertwine. Leffen's vendettas would become specific to people who posed a threat to his influence. To show you what I mean, consider the market share diagram I've shown you throughout this video. I first used this diagram to show that when Leffen conspired with Jisoo to pin Zero as a sex offender, Leffen would benefit by rising to the number 1 position. The fact that Leffen conspired with those intentions tells you everything you need to know, which is that he's someone who will use any means necessary in order to maximize his influence. This is why, unsurprisingly, Leffen placed a hit on HBox as well. If Leffen's hit on HBox had succeeded, then Leffen could have had a large lead over everyone else on this diagram. Leffen would also pounce on the opportunity to cancel M2K, which, if successful, would have consolidated Leffen's influence even further. The reason I saw through all of this is because I've secretly been on Leffen's hit list for 10 years. It all started with him taking an issue with the fact that I was well respected on Smashboards, which made me realize that he couldn't stand people who threatened his influence. This would end up turning into a lifelong vendetta that would not only cause me extreme suffering, but also make it easy for me to see through everything else that he did. In Chapter 4, I introduced the term social engineering, which is a fancy term for manipulating the masses in favorable ways. I introduced this term after I showed how Leffen had not only managed to con HBox out of his reputation for an entire year, but also milked the transaction for all it was worth by telling the Genesis 6 crowd to calm down. Leffen's ability to get away with that tweet showed his mastery over social engineering, because he not only weakened an adversary of his, but also managed to boost his reputation in the process. This tweet reveals motive even further because it shows that Leffen approaches every situation as a socioeconomic transaction. Everything that Leffen has ever done makes complete sense once you view things from the perspective of social engineering. From this perspective, Leffen would have initiated his beef with Chillin with the intention of getting a sponsor more quickly, and he would have initiated his beef with Salem with the intention of mobilizing the Smash Ultimate community underneath him. The key thing to pay attention to in this clip is that by throwing Salem under the bus, Leffen was able to heroize himself and pick up a crowd full of fans at a very efficient rate. This is the perspective that everything Leffen does should be viewed from. If you have any doubt remaining that this is the approach Leffen is taking, then let's listen to the man himself.
The whole thing started, I think, with obviously I'm trying to go full time, and Chillin' Dude was sponsored, and to me he was just sponsored because he was in the documentary. To me, I was just well, I deserve the sponsor. So it was both a little bit of a jealousy, but also I know I can use this angle to stir things up and make my own brand.
As cheerful as the clip you just watched may seem, it's actually representative of a very malevolent mindset. It's the mindset of someone willing to ascend no matter what the path of destruction they leave behind might look like. That brings me to some of the darker testimonies regarding Leffen's agenda, which come from people who I believe have a very good idea of what's going on. The first testimony comes from C, who I first introduced in Chapter 5. C said that Leffen's goal is to dehumanize people and mass mobilize them underneath him. I then brought up how Leffen regularly uses mass manipulation tactics, such as repeating lies to the point that people believe them. C continued by describing Leffen as a propaganda machine. He then recommended I look up Edward Bernays' teachings. Bernays was a pioneer in the field of public relations and propaganda, and the art of controlling crowds of people effectively. The next testimony came from Otak, one of the boxed representatives who tried to get Leffen to stop lying about game mechanics in Chapter 3. Otak described Leffen as the Trump of the Melee community in the sense that his every move is a carefully planned political heist that doesn't seem to be. Otak also said that Leffen would gladly lie to his audience in order to advance his own fame, which we've seen many times throughout this video.
I'm not happy until every aspect of godhood is torn away, and there's only one god, and that's me.
The quote you just heard is narcissistic to the point that it should raise concern. Even without knowing much about the person behind it, it just sounds like they'd be willing to destroy other people in order to ascend. That brings me to the very first Evidence.zip testimony I showed you in this video, which was also the most important one. This is the testimony that read, "For years, Leffen has imposed on the happiness of countless members of our community. His unparalleled hatred and vulgarity leave people feeling belittled and attacked wherever he goes. His self-righteousness, manipulation, lies, superiority complex, nonsensical reasons for attacking people, and refusal to change make him a threat to not only the Smash community, but society. He's both a psychopath and a narcissist to a dangerous degree." The three aspects of this testimony that I want to highlight are narcissism, psychopathy, and manipulation. Throughout this video, I've been showing you strategies Leffen regularly uses, such as preemptive defenses, blanket statements, projections, and so on. The title of the article these strategies came from is 20 Diversion Tactics Highly Manipulative Narcissists, Sociopaths, and Psychopaths Use to Silence You. Furthermore, the traits I just listed are known to come in a cluster called Dark Triad, which has been gaining more traction recently due to the fact that a lot of successful people are sadly following this model as a path to success. The trait you may not recognize from this list is Machiavellianism, which doesn't refer to a diagnosis, but rather a political philosophy. Machiavellianism is a trait which sees a person so focused on their own interests that they will manipulate, deceive, and exploit others to achieve their goals. This is exactly what I meant when I described Leffen's by any means necessary approach. The prime example of a dark triad who has conquered modern-day politics is Donald Trump, for anyone wondering. Trump's politics were so deceptive and exploitative that many of those who could see through them considered him un-American. Some people even compared Trump to totalitarians in the sense that his policies were clearly designed to benefit himself and no one else. Totalitarianism refers to a political system in which one person looks to make their country or community's politics revolve around them. The desire to do this requires a high degree of narcissism, psychopathy, and deception. If you look at the status quo of Smash, a lot of what goes on behind the scenes can only be described as totalitarian in Leffen's favor. In Chapter 3, we learned that the top player who's done the most for the scene in terms of technological advancement has secretly been getting stalked and stifled by Leffen for 10 years. Leffen has directly looked to stop me from providing the scene with things like the box and UCF, and he's been willing to go as far as to lie about game mechanics in order to get his way. This has forced me to respond with documentation and tutorials in order to debunk his lies. Leffen even blackmailed me at one point in order to keep me silent during the box legality phase, which put thousands of people's careers in jeopardy. He also overran my free tournament series with a paid one earlier this year. What this shows is the desire to deprive the scene of products and services in favor of either Leffen-branded products and services or no products and services at all. In Chapter 4, we learned that HBox, the rank 1 player at the time, nearly lost his career to false rumors that Leffen was spreading. These rumors incited hatred, which caused crowds to become hostile. Leffen did this because he decided that instead of surpassing HBox, he could maliciously end his career instead. Leffen went to great lengths in order to see this plan of his through. He exploited an up-and-coming player named Snowy in order to add credibility to his smear campaign, while also engaging in other acts of hatred, such as censoring HBox's name in his chat and spreading tons of propaganda. Leffen also kept HBox silent with blackmail, just as he did to me during that same time period. In Chapter 5, we learned that Leffen manipulated not only the Smash community, but the entire world through the use of a MeToo video that contained a false victim testimony as well as numerous disingenuous tweets. This was not only insanely unethical, but it also allowed Leffen to leverage the movement in several malicious ways. Most notably, Leffen and Jisoo conspired to cancel a then-innocent Zero, which people overlook because Zero ended up being guilty of other charges in the end. However, Leffen's conspiracy did end up ricocheting into the cancellation of an innocent Sky Williams. Leffen is also potentially responsible for the fact that M2K had to publicize sensitive information in order to disprove baseless rumors, although it can't be definitively proven. A fun fact about the MeToo Con is that it's written right into psychology books that those with a dark triad mentality will capitalize on these types of situations in order to prosper, whereas anyone with even a shred of morality would never consider such a thing. Dark triads actually view these situations as opportunities to exploit people with virtue signals and victim signals. In Chapter 6, we learned that Leffen lied extensively on the night of the original metagame broadcast by claiming that Evidence.zip was nothing more than a bunch of forum posts. Samox, Melee's premier filmmaker, was fully exploited that night when he was forced to agree to censor and revise future runs of Metagame. The rerun of Metagame would end up consisting of not only a hero narrative for Leffen, but also a completely false narrative about what Evidence.zip was. The rerun had no mention of the fact that Leffen bullied someone with a hearing aid to the point that they quit the game, or any mention of the other Evidence.zip victims. In Chapters 1 and 2, we learned that Leffen began to delete evidence pertaining to several of these cons right after I uploaded Evidence.zip 2. Leffen would also manipulate the community by victimizing himself, which led to me being deemed a threat to Leffen's safety and getting globally banned. I also mentioned how Leffen targeted technicals by encouraging people to push him out of the community once technicals began to suspect foul play behind Leffen's MeToo involvement. All of these actions were intended to evade allegations while vilifying the people who made them. The next thing I should mention is that in order to get here, Leffen manipulated the media at several previous points in time in order to fully conceal the truth about Evidence.zip. Evidence.zip was a collective warning that Leffen was someone so malevolent that he had the potential to erode the entire Smash scene if he wasn't locked away. Looking back at Evidence.zip, the Swedes couldn't have been any more right. All in all, the totality of these cons is unthinkable, and the motivation behind them is clearly to claw to the top of the Smash community at anyone's expense. With that being said, there's one last subject I want to go over, and that's Leffen's social media tendencies. Leffen's social media tendencies seal the deal in terms of his motivations because they're one-to-one with what you'd expect from someone who's intent on conquering their community. Something we've already gone over is the fact that Leffen uses deceptive social media bios in order to lure unsuspecting people in, but there are several other tendencies that people should be wary of as well. These tendencies are incredibly in line with the social engineering strategies you'd see a totalitarian employ in order to control the masses. I'm referring to strategies such as censorship, propaganda, and intimidation tactics such as surveillance. There is exactly one person in the Smash community who employs all of these strategies, and that's Leffen. Leffen is known to engage in censorship on social media by blocking everyone who disagrees with him to the point that he probably has thousands of people blocked. People overlook the fact that the block feature becomes a weapon when it's used in this way, as it's no longer being used to prevent harassment, but rather to force conformity. Another purpose the block feature serves when used in this way is to evade allegations, which seems to have rubbed off on lesser manipulators such as Jisoo. Leffen has taught Jisoo to never acknowledge allegations, but rather to block everyone until people forget about them. It's for reasons like these that I advocate for mass blocking to be banned on social media, as it's actually quite a huge loophole. The next strategy Leffen employs is surveillance. This refers to his tendency to attack people at random on social media, which creates the effect that they're being watched. People currently have no choice but to glorify Leffen's surveillance, since speaking out can get you in trouble, but I want to show you how backwards this is. 8 years ago, I wrote in my Evidence.zip testimony, from late 2011 to this day, there have probably been about 20 posts I've had fully typed out and ended up deleting or not posting because I knew Leffen would be there to capitalize on aspects of them. Many of these were good, thought-provoking posts. The thought of feeding Leffen posts to respond to with insults has caused me to withhold several posts I would have otherwise made. This excerpt shows the illegitimate pressure surveillance creates. Just like censorship, surveillance is another social engineering tool that allows someone to gradually take over by instilling fear into their dissenters. Another thing to know is that the person performing surveillance on the community is secretly deranged. Leffen doesn't just perform surveillance, he also has the capacity to stalk people for 10 years while responding to their actions within less than a day. This means that Leffen's tendency to perform surveillance is an extension of his need to exert an extreme degree of control. The next strategy Leffen employs is propaganda, which we've already seen plenty of. C referred to Leffen as a propaganda machine, which is accurate when you consider how much propaganda we've seen from him. Leffen even has entities like TSM, Red Bull, and now Samox releasing propaganda in his favor, which means the propaganda goes in both directions. Another thing Leffen does is use propaganda to enforce certain opinions of his as law onto the community, such as the idea that the Marth-Fox matchup is 6-4. This has created an effect within the community that causes people to think you're stupid if you go against the latest opinion Leffen is trending. Even looking past the major cons Leffen has pulled off, he's unhealthy for the community on a basic level. Leffen's desire to control the masses to this degree is representative of someone who's not only very insecure, but also very dehumanizing. Unsurprisingly, there's an Armada quote within Evidence.zip that goes, "At one point, Leffen basically told me and another smasher from Sweden that he thinks humans shouldn't show as much respect toward each other as they do most of the time." Another example of dehumanization is Leffen's overt declaration that he's genetically superior to other people. These quotes corroborate the mentality I've been describing, which is one that looks to mobilize and subdue the masses. Furthermore, the person behind all of this isn't a fraction as trustworthy as he wants you to believe. In fact, he's highly manipulative. What Leffen does is he creates the illusion of trust, and then he lies in massively damaging ways. Over the course of this video, we've seen Leffen misrepresent in-person interactions in ways that completely change the meaning of what happened. We've also seen him willingly spread misinformation after being begged not to do so. Above all else, we've seen Leffen receive an insanely high number of interactions on tweets that were intended to manipulate people. Tweets like the ones about Evidence.zip 1 and 2, all of the MeToo tweets, and so on were intended to manipulate people in ways that can't be considered safe or acceptable for society. The worst part is that Leffen knows better than anyone that the best solution is to continue to lie and manipulate, since if he were to ever admit that he lied about even one thing, it would spiral into him having to admit to lying about everything. The last subject I want to talk about in this video is called cult of personality, which is another characteristic of a totalitarian society. Cult of personality refers to when social engineering methods are used to create an idealized image of a leader. Something to know is that the melee community tends to create cults of personality on its own. For example, Mango is regarded as the hero of the game, which is fine because he fulfills that role. But in Leffen's case, his cult of personality has become his way of disguising his true motivations and justifying his malicious actions. His status as an anti-hero allows him to fall back on whichever side of the coin he needs in that specific moment. To show you what I mean, I'll give you 3 examples of how Leffen's cult of personality has objectively damaged the scene. The first example is the EVO 2018 commentary block from Chapter 4. Within this commentary block, Scar and Toph complimented Leffen for smear campaigning HBox. Scar even said, "But that's what we like about him," in reference to Leffen. This means that Leffen can attempt to smear campaign someone out of their career, then fall back on his villain persona in order to justify it. 5 years prior to this commentary block, there were Swedes desperately warning people not to let this happen. The next example has to do with the fact that Leffen was chosen by Fizzy as the representative for Rollback Melee when it came out last year. The reason this decision was corrupt is because Leffen has looked to stifle advancements such as the box and UCF in order to cripple his rivals. He's also spread misinformation about game mechanics for similar purposes, and he's even advised people to modify their controllers in disadvantageous ways. Yet when Fizzy came out with revolutionary technology, he chose Leffen because of his marketability. This decision sets the precedent that there's no point in even trying to contribute to this community. And finally, the last example is Deep Leffenbot. Deep Leffenbot is a great Twitter account, but it's also the pinnacle of how the community has receded. This has nothing to do with the tweets themselves, but rather who Deep Leffenbot teaches people to worship. Now that we know about all the corruption that Leffen has perpetrated, the fact that Deep Leffenbot makes him that much harder to impeach is actually very damaging. It practically ingrains Leffen's toxicity into the community and indoctrinates people on a daily basis. Another example of how the community has receded is this advertisement, which teaches people to glorify a mass manipulator. This advertisement shows that the scene views Leffen as an authoritative, trustworthy source of information, when he's in fact massively corrupt. The worst part about everything I've shown you in this video is that it all could have been prevented. 8.5 years ago, I emailed the Evo staff to warn them about a verbal assailant who posed a massive threat to the community, but they didn't believe me. I've now not only had to watch all of my predictions come true, but I've also managed to find myself banned and ridiculed for vocalizing. One last thing to know is that I'm not alone in my beliefs. The Facebook messages you're looking at were sent to me by some of the biggest names in the Smash scene in reference to Leffen, but as you can see, people are afraid to speak out. The scene is currently paralyzed with fear and stuck in one of the most dangerous status quos of all time.
There's this saying that I like, that is, all it takes for evil people to succeed is for good people to do nothing. And I really do think that's true. In my opinion, the world is not filled of majority evil people. I think that's something that people tell themselves in order to kind of put blame away from themselves, that they couldn't have done anything, everyone's bad, and if I'm bad, you know, I'm just part of the majority. I really do think that the majority of people are either decent or good. However, many good and decent people do not do enough, myself included. And we need to change that.
All it takes for evil people to succeed is for good people to do nothing. The fact that the real meaning of that quote went over everybody's heads last summer truly goes to show the degree of evil that the Smash community has encountered. That quote was Leffen himself telling the community exactly why he knows he's been so successful throughout all of this, and it's because good people are doing nothing to stop him. Part of the reason that good people are doing nothing to stop him is because nobody even knew that this was going on. And that's because to know that this was going on, you would have had to have been in very specific situations. In fact, I think there's one specific situation you would have had to have been in, and that's the original set of Evidence.zip testimonies. And that's because that set of testimonies came from before when Leffen started doing a really good job of concealing his true nature to the community. And so as the only one left from back then, I was able to easily see through all of this, whereas no one else was able to. And that's why when I first came out with the allegation that a regime was being performed on the community, a lot of people immediately wrote me off, and understandably so. I mean, a regime is a ridiculous allegation, especially for a gaming community. Here in the Smash community, we really only ever see two types of allegations do people in, those being physical assault and sexual assault. Those allegations are very open and shut. The person either committed them or they didn't, and if they did, they're banned. If they didn't, then they're not. A regime, on the other hand, is a very invisible crime. It's invisible in the sense that you have to be able to see through someone's true motivations for their community. And once you see through the motivations behind all the things Leffen did throughout this video, it actually becomes pretty obvious that a regime is being performed. Now, despite the fact that a regime is invisible, a regime is also an extremely dangerous crime. It's a crime that deserves to be met with the highest degree of punishment, hence the caption of this video. And that's because a regime can be considered a societal restructuring, where the hierarchy of your community is restructured to heavily favor one person at the expense of everybody else. Meaning, all of the conspiracies that you saw throughout this video, there will be more of them if this is allowed to keep up. And so that raises the question of whether or not this is a world that the community wants to accept. Whether or not the community wants to choose one player over everyone else. And the reason that I implore the community to make the right decision based on what I've shown you is because we need to keep this community a place where the people working for it are protected and the people who are working against it are condemned, and make sure that things don't fall into the hands of people who are trying to make it so that it's the other way around. It's as simple as choosing between good and evil once you look at all of the facts. See, we live in a world where good and evil can be easily muddled, and the supervillains who really know what they're doing will always antagonize the good guys and influence people to turn against them. But after this video, there should be no doubt remaining as to what's going on here in the Smash community. And so I'm hopeful that this video will help restore prosperity to the community and help build a better future for not only this community, but perhaps surrounding communities as well. So with that being said, thanks for watching the video. I look forward to hearing your feedback, and I just want people to remember that I did this for the community.